Hi there, thank you for either your interest in the DIY board painting kit or for purchasing one. So when you purchase one, it's an 11 by 20 board. It can either be stained in white, like shown, gray, classic gray, it's a light gray, or espresso, which is a dark brown, or early American, which is a lighter brown, and I can also do ebony, which is pretty close to espresso, but a little more black. So you are going to receive your board. You're going to receive some Mod Podge, which I'm going to show you what to do with, some paint, which you can choose black, white, ivory, two sponges. You're going to get one of these plastic tools to help you with your stencil, and then you're going to get a stencil. And the stencil will have, in this version, it'll have your monogram letter, and it can say the, with your last name, family, so the Porter family, or it could say the Porters established with a date. So those are the options. So I'm going to get started. When you get this, you are going to find a flat surface to do this on. You're going to flip over your stencil, your yellow stencil, so that the white is facing up. I'm going to move my board for a second while I do this. And you're just going to use this little plastic tool to give it a really good rub so that your stencil gets on the transfer tape. There's a clear transfer tape on the other side. So when you rub it like this, the whole stencil just goes to the transfer tape. And so then you're going to slowly peel off the white. This is going to end up as garbage. And you want to make sure that all of your yellow stencil stays on the transfer tape. So if any doesn't, if any stays on this white, you're going to want to put it back down and rub it again and then start peeling off. So you just want to make sure that all of your stencil stays in your transfer tape. Okay, perfect. So that is your stencil. It is sticky, so you don't want to turn it over and lay it on anything except for your board. So I'm going to put my board back here, and you're going to want to center the yellow on your board. It should be pretty much the size of your board or a little bit smaller, and so you just want to make sure that it's centered on your board. As long as it's centered on your board, your image should be perfectly placed. Okay, so I have my stencil on the board. So now I'm going to take this plastic tool again, and I'm going to give it a really good rub again. Making sure like any little bubbles get out. By the way, don't throw away yet that white piece that we peeled off, because we're going to use that again in a second. It will eventually get thrown away, but okay, perfect. So now I'm going to peel off this clear transfer tape, and this time you want to make sure that all of the stencil stays on the board. When I do this, the easiest way to do it is to keep the transfer tape close to the board and just kind of peel it off that way. Sometimes if you pull straight up, it doesn't work as well. So you want to just keep it close to the board, making sure that all those middles of the letters stay on. Okay, now this is garbage. So now your stencil is on. So now just to make sure that the stencil, kind of when we peeled up that transfer tape, it might have pulled the stencil a little bit up. And so just to be sure, I lay this white piece back on shiny side up. And I just give it another good rub just to make sure that it's fully, sticking to the board. And that helps that we don't get any bleeding. on the board, and it helps the lines to be really crisp. And then I also use this again. I'm going to put my paint on top of it, and that way I can use this paper to kind of blot some of the paint off. Okay, so my paint is right here. You see? Okay, so the first step is this white, and this is Mod Podge. So it's just the regular Mod Podge that you buy from the store. It's matte, and not everybody does this, but I like to do a layer of Mod Podge first. It really seals, again, the board so that I get perfect lines, so that I don't get any bleeding through the stencil. So these are little makeup sponges, and you're going to use the flat part of the sponge. You're going to dip it in and kind of rub it off on the side, and then even maybe dip off a little bit. You want barely any on here, so you don't want a whole lot, and you're going to go through and you're just going to go up and down, and I probably need just a little bit more than I. So you're going to go up and down to get just a nice thin layer over all of the parts of the stencil that are going to get painted. So I'm going to go ahead and do this, and then I will be back to show you the painting. Okay, so I'm done with the Mod Podge. It does dry pretty quick, but you want to make sure that it dries. One other thing is I do give you 2 sponges, but if something happens and you need another sponge, one little tip that you can do, I just use this on Mod Podge, and if I wanted to say use a different color paint, I could cut off this very tip, and it would make the sponge smaller, but it would make it usable again. So you can use these multiple times. You just will cut the tip off where you paint it each time. The other thing I want to let you know, so I'm about to start painting. This one is this is black, but the person who is receiving this board wanted it to be maybe a little bit more of a dark gray, and so I took my black and I just mixed a little bit of white in with it. So that is an option too. This is kind of a really dark gray. One thing that you want to make note is that there most likely will be this kind of border around your stencil. So when you're painting these parts, like the leaves and this little line, you want to be super careful around the edge, because if you get your sponge over here on the edge, it's going to go off the stencil onto your board where you don't want it. So make sure you're very careful of that. Okay, so this top part looks like the Mod Podge is still wet, but down here it looks pretty good, like it's dry. So I'm going to go ahead and start painting. Now, this first coat of paint is super important that you go super light as well. As you add more coats, you can put more, but the first coat especially, if you want really crisp lines, you want to go pretty light. So again, I'm going to dip it in the paint. Okay, so you saw my video just cut out for a second, but I was working on the first coat, and just to reiterate, you want to do a super light coat on your first coat of paint. Okay, so my first coat is on. You can see I did kind of start off lighter and get a little bit more, but the lighter you can be, the better, the first coat. So it dries very quickly, especially if you go super light. So I'm going to do 2 more coats, or until you feel like it is thick enough. And I'm going to start back down here where it is more dry. So I'm going to go ahead and go through it 2 more times. And again, the next coats that you do, you don't have to be quite as careful, because it should pretty much be sealed now. So hopefully, if you did the first steps of the Mod Podge and you did the light coat, it shouldn't bleed now. So I'm going to go ahead and just go over it 2 more times. Some paint on your hands, and so I'm going to wash my hands real quick so I don't get any on the board. Okay, so now the fun part of seeing your final result. So let's see, I'm going to turn this, I think. We're going to slowly peel off the stencil. I like to peel it off when it's still wet. Sometimes if it dries, it will peel off the paint. So we want to grab a corner, and you're going to slowly peel. Again, I like to do this when it's wet. So you do have to be careful not to smudge any wet paint. So I hold the board with one hand and I slowly peel. If you have another person close by that could kind of help you hold the board and peel, that may be helpful. I am loving this gray paint, dark gray on top of the white stained board. It's a white stain, so you can still see the wood grain through it, which I love. Okay, so I'm now, if the stencil rips, definitely okay. It's gonna probably, when you get to this bottom part, it's gonna probably rip a bit as you're peeling it off. Sometimes when I get to the bottom part, I then go to the bottom corner and I peel it up. So be really careful. Like, again, I get paint on my hands frequently, and so you just have to be really careful as you're touching the board not to smudge any paint. Now, the only thing that I did not provide you with that I use is I have like this little poking tool that I will kind of stick under when I'm peeling up. So if you can really use probably a multitude of things, like maybe even a little knife that you would stick under to peel up, or maybe some tweezers with a pointed edge. If you let it dry, it would be easier for this part only to kind of peel up some of the middles of the letters. But you can even use if you have long fingernails. For me, this helps, but I'm sure there's something in your house that you could use to pull up these little parts. So I'm gonna go ahead and, again, you can wait for the middles, you can wait for it to dry to peel those up. Or if you're impatient like me and you have something, you can pull them up now. A couple tips while I'm doing this is, if mistakes happen, and if for example you get some paint on your board that you didn't mean to get, or like a baby wipe, or just a wet paper towel or wet washcloth, and sometimes if you rub lightly over the paint that's on the board, it will get it off. The other thing is, so I'm going to peel out this middle of the P. Sometimes, like there's a couple spots on here where the gray paint came up a little bit. And so I am going to take just a small paintbrush and fill that in the couple spots. Also, if you do get it, if it bleeds at all, I don't see any major bleeding on this, maybe right here a little bit. If it bleeds at all, you can take something sharp and just kind of scrape off the paint where it bled. But remember, this is your creation, so it does give it character. It's not store-bought, it's something that you made. So here's the finished product. I hope that helped. I hope it made sense. I hope it was easy enough. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me and message me, and I'd be happy to answer any of your questions. But I hope you love it, and I hope you're happy with your finished result. Okay, so I'm feeling like it has very good coverage. I'm feeling like 3 coats was good, and so I'm going to close up this paint just so we don't have any accidents here. And as you can see, it really does not take very much paint or Mod Podge to cover that up. I'm going to move all of this. And then you'll probably get some paint on your hands, and so I'm going to wash my hands real quick so I don't get any on the